Now, keeping on politics, it's been reported that a government unit used social media to prevent the public from having discussions about lockdown policies during the pandemic. Now, many people have said that lockdown significantly reduced the rate of new infections from the coronavirus, and the mass vaccination of both young and old saved millions of lives. But others would say lockdown kept many isolated and deprived, the young of their right to education, and many also raised awareness of the negative effects of some COVID policies on the public's mental health and well-being. Now, you can get lots more on that on this story on our website. Simply head to gbnews.com, where you'll find the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. Now, joining me to discuss this story more is member of Reform UK and former MEP Ben Habib and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. Good of you to come in. Now, this story is on the front page of the Telegraph today, and I just wanted to make... what did you make of it when you saw this story this morning? Let's start with you, Ben. What did you make of it when you saw this story?
Well, you know, the whole response to COVID has been shrouded in mystery and sort of government control from the minute it raised its head. You know, one of the first things that happened was that Ofcom were given powers to regulate the media over what the media could and couldn't say, medical effects of it and so on and so forth. And you might also recall very early on with COVID, the Great Barrington Declaration, when 4,000 world-leading epidemiologists and scientists came together on a response that was anti-lockdown and principally based on the isolation of those who are vulnerable and the elderly. And that was given no truck as well. And then there was the debate over whether or not this virus was manufactured in a Chinese lab. That was shut down. The WHO would have none of that. And, you know, we've had a series of shutdowns of debates when it comes to COVID, including, it seems, great resistance from the government in looking back at their own policies and what was done in a committee that they commissioned to undertake that very task. And so the whole thing, I think the government's almost ashamed and fearful of being held to account on the lockdowns from the beginning to the end. And of course, we do now know that the lockdowns had a massive impact on this country. All the kinds of things you were just talking about, Dawn, but also the economy. You know, national debt went up by 33%. We emerged from the lockdowns to rising inflation, broken supply chains, broken labour market, people still not going back into work. We emerged from the lockdowns actually with a broken NHS. The NHS was not protected as a result of lockdowns. That needs some open debate and a light shone on it. So there's a whole host of things that come out of lockdown that I think have, for want of a better expression, been shut down in public debate.
So you're not surprised by this story? You actually think this was actually a step too far, that they were shutting down, and they were just shutting down people who were genuinely scared as well, rather than conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's remarkable, isn't it, that people were calling out the AstraZeneca vaccine for a while, and they were shut down because you weren't allowed to talk against vaccines. But AstraZeneca has been now removed as a vaccine response. And there's no commentary on why that... I don't want to be a kind of anti-vax nutter.
No. This isn't about... This is about our liberty to discuss things.
You have to have the ability to discuss it.
Absolutely.
And Andrew Bridgen absolutely, for example, had the right to get up in Parliament and repeatedly question these things. And you shouldn't be shut down in doing so.
He has been shut down. Matthew, I'm assuming you would think differently about this. You think that they were right to actually monitor some of the more out there conspiracy theories that people were discussing?
So, Dawn, I'm a journalist by trade, so I believe in debate, dispute, interrogating evidence, free speech, such as it's allowed under the law. On the face of it, this would be a story that's instinctively scares me, because the idea of the government monitoring us is quite a sinister one.
Yes.
But if you dig deeper into the story, and anyone who follows me on Twitter or watches me on GB News will know I'm not a fan of this Conservative government. But if you dig deeper into the story, I'm not sure it's quite as sinister as it first appears. So the information that this counter-disinformation unit was monitoring was public information. The government claims, if we're to believe them, the government claims that this unit did not track individuals. So it was looking at trends of misinformation or disinformation, which is worse than misinformation. And that there was a blanket ban of reporting any journalist or MP to the social media companies. If we're to believe the government in their response, I think that takes something of the sting out of this. Now, how do we respond to the disaster of the pandemic? It's absolutely right that we have a full and frank and open, transparent process by which we interrogate the decisions that were made. And that's what we've got with the COVID inquiry. And I fully support the fact that we've got that. It's really important that people like me, who broadly speaking supported the government in the very draconian actions that they took, that people like me have our views properly interrogated. We have to also remember, and this will be part of the inquiry, just how scary it was back in February of 2020. You were looking at those hospitals in northern Italy where COVID patients were overflowing. People were dying in their droves. And what the government was trying to do was to protect the NHS at a moment of crisis so that people like you, like me, like Ben, would not die on trolleys, starving of oxygen.
So basically, Ben, Matthew is saying that the government were right to do this because they were looking after us and protecting us.
Right to lock down is what you're saying. Well, I disagree. That happens to be my position. I think we knew very early on that the virus principally attacked the vulnerable and the elderly. We knew that right at the beginning, actually. And you know, one of the first things the government did, and isn't being looked into, is releasing old people from hospitals straight into care homes. Which,
Matthew says, hopefully will come out in the inquiry.
And so it seems extraordinary to me that we had this draconian stripping of civil rights, the ability for people to earn an honest day's wage, to go to work, to look after their families, to be sent to home, locked up against their will, not allowed to come out. And the big shift there, I think, for a true libertarian, the big shift there was the notion that you no longer look after yourself, that you're no longer responsible for yourself. You're now somehow responsible for everyone else. A collectivization of risk and risk management. And that is the dumbing down, the infantilizing of society. So I was inherently against lockdowns. I think people should have been told what the risks of the virus were, and then they should have been entitled to make their own decisions on how they live their lives.
There seem to me to have been two reasons to be against lockdown. One is on ideological grounds, which is, you could argue, a reasonable reason for being against them. You think that there shouldn't be such a collectivisation. That collectivisation shouldn't be forced upon us, and it shouldn't have been for the state to take our liberties away in order to protect the vulnerable.
Correct.
And I happen to disagree with that, although broadly speaking I am a libertarian and I don't like authority. I'll speak out against authority whenever authority I feel is overweening. I hold this government to account, I would argue, fearlessly. I've suffered as a consequence professionally, arguably, for holding this Conservative government to account. The other reason to oppose lockdowns is a utilitarian one. The idea that actually lockdowns in the end might cause more harm, might indirectly be responsible for more deaths than they saved. We don't know, I don't think, I certainly can't tell you as a journalist at this point, whether or not that's the case. That is one of the things I would like this public inquiry to look at. Do we think, looking back, that those lockdowns saved more lives than in the end they may have cost by the strain that is now on the NHS waiting list? One final thing, and that is back in February 2020, let us remember, we didn't have the benefit of hindsight. All we knew at that point was that a deadly virus was sweeping first through China and then through Europe and was killing very large numbers of people in Italy. And quite understandably, the government was terrified. The government's primary responsibility is to keep us safe, both from foreign threats and also from disease. And that's what it was trying to do. Whether it got it right or not, I don't know.
I just want to reiterate, we did know that it was the elderly and the vulnerable that were...
But they're worth saving, Ben, aren't they? The elderly and the vulnerable.
They are, but it's up to them if they wish to be saved. They can self-isolate. They can stay at home. There are ways to do it. I know my mother included, who was in her late 80s, still thankfully in her late 80s, who wanted to be let out. She wanted to live a normal life. She was prepared to take the risk, but she had to self-isolate.
The problem is a lot of elderly...
And she was shut away from any support from her family.
Sorry, before we're running out of time, just a one-word quick answer here. Do you think the government went too far during the pandemic with how much they monitored social media? Matthew, just one word.
No.
Ben?
Absolutely, yes.
Interesting. So thank you very much. So that is Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP. Thank you. And Matthew Stadden, political commentator. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.